Oh, God, where do I start? Rowdy Roddy?
I have no context for what that means.
Oh.
The only thing I know him from is this movie. So
far too young.
So can somebody enlighten me?
He was like Hulk Hogan's arch nemesis in the WWF.
Really?
Yeah, he was a very popular
Which is what they called wrestling before it was called WWE.
Yeah. Back in the 80s, he was like the big heel of, he was like the Triple H of the 1980s WWF.
Wow, I do not see that.
And
okay.
Yeah, so he was a very popular wrestler at the time. And in fact, John Carpenter was at WrestleMania 3, and that's when he met Rowdy Roddy. And he liked the guy, and he was like, you know what, I want to put him in my new movie.
It worked well. I mean,
I like that son of a gun.
if you're a wrestling fan, you know who Roddy Piper is. Yeah. He's like classic.
Why is he called that? Is there
because his whole thing was he was like his character in WWF was this Scottish guy. He'd wear a kilt.
Really?
Yeah, and he was just like this rebellious Scotsman who was just loudmouth.
His whole thing was he was just crazy.
Yeah.
He was never a big dude compared to the other guys.
That's what I was going to say. He's pretty small stature.
He was never cut. He never had that physique.
Yeah.
He was just crazy.
But he was really good on the mic.
Yeah, he had really good mic skills. So
yeah,
sure.
he ad-libbed a lot of his lines in this movie, especially the bubblegum line that was just straight from him.
That's fantastic.
Which we would not have gotten if Kurt Russell had been in this role.
Is this another possible Kurt Russell role?
Yeah, so originally Carpenter wrote this for Kurt Russell, but he had just done like 4 movies with Kurt as his leading man. He's like, I don't want to get stuck with Kurt Russell for the rest of my life. So he was like, he actually went out to like Tom Cruise and like,
I cannot see
Johnny
Tom Cruise in this
Johnny
movie.
Depp and
oh my God, definitely not Johnny Depp.
Like a bunch of famous actors at the time that he was considering offering the role to, and eventually he was like, "Oh, I'm just going to offer it to this wrestler."
I think it worked perfectly, honestly, and it's good to know that he had some talent with the mic because, like, usually when you take a wrestler from the ring and put him in a movie, it doesn't usually go that well. It's
does not translate
well, this was the first movie to ever cast a professional wrestler in the leading role. Like Rowdy Roddy Piper opened the door for Jesse Ventura and The Rock and Hulk Hogan and all these wrestlers who, in fact, he had to quit the WWF to do the movie because Vince McMahon didn't want him to do it. So he was like, "F you, Vince McMahon." He went and did the movie, and the movie premiered at like #1 at the box office, and so he came back to the WWF twice as popular as he was before he left.
Nice.
Yeah, so he was like, "F you, Vince McMahon."
I do what I want.
That's a nice backstory. Thank you guys. I had no idea about any of that stuff,
unfortunately. But it was funny because, as you'd mentioned, Rowdy Roddy Piper, the most famous line from this film is, "I'm here to kick ass and chew bubblegum, and I'm all out of bubblegum."
Yeah,
and like he had written that down in a notebook for stuff to say in the ring. and he just decided to use it for this movie, and John Carpenter was like, "Yeah, okay." like he had another great line where he says like, "Life's a bitch and she's in heat."
Yep. Yeah.
Mama don't like tattletales.
Yeah, Mama don't like tattletales. It's funny because Rowdy Roddy Piper, he had kind of a hard life. And unfortunately, he passed away a couple years back. But he was homeless for a while, and he really had to work hard to get to where he was. And I believe he was Canadian.
He was Canadian.
Yeah. So he had to apply for green cards and immigrate into the U.S. and stuff like that. He was a guy who really worked for everything that he had. And John Carpenter just saw on his face the hard life that had come up, and he wanted that for the character. And one of the John Carpenter's kind of trademarks is like a lot of his movies don't have a lot of dialogue or stuff happening.
Yeah, it's all very visual.
A lot of his movies take their time to get going, and this movie, like the whole first act, is just very slow, very, very slow. And Rowdy Roddy Piper does not have a lot of dialogue in this movie. So a lot of his performance is just based off of his reactions to stuff, like his facial reactions. And I think even Rowdy Piper later on, years after they made the movie and they go back, they're doing the audio commentaries for it. I think he kind of expressed regret that, he wished he had done stuff a little bit differently, but because he was like so new to feature film acting, wasn't quite right. But there was a controversy where there's a scene where Roddy Piper is on a construction site, and he's got his shirt off, and he's like, digging a ditch or something. And I turned to Jude when we were watching it, and I was like, man, Roddy Piper was ripped. and because, Vader said earlier about how he wasn't always as big as some of the other wrestlers out there. A lot of people accused the film of putting his head on a stand-in's body to make him look buffer than he really was. And,
could they do that back then?
Not really, but
I was gonna say,
but I mean, when Roddy Piper, when he'd go touring around.
I think just to clarify on that, what I really mean is Vince McMahon in WWE. He has a body type. He's notoriously stubborn especially back in the '80s, for his wrestlers to all be big, buff, not necessarily cut like they are today, but just big dudes. Like Hulk Hogan. He was exceptionally big, but if you look at the wrestlers back then, they all have a certain body type, and Roddy Piper really stood out against those guys in a lot of ways. So
yeah, and when he was touring around doing his wrestling shows, fans would come up to him and be like, did they just put your head on someone else's body in that movie? and when he mentioned it to John Carpenter was like, what are these people talking about? We wouldn't have done that.